Hello everyone, and welcome back to English Gateway. Today we are going on a journey through one of the most fascinating stories in world history, the story of Britain. When you look at Britain on a map, it may seem like a small group of islands. But this small island has played a huge role in shaping the modern world. Its people built kingdoms. They fought wars. They created laws. They explored distant oceans. They built an enormous empire. They started an industrial revolution, and their language, English, eventually spread across the world. But Britain's history is not simply a story of kings, queens, victories, and power. It is also a story of ordinary people: farmers, workers, soldiers, writers, inventors, rebels, and millions of people whose lives slowly changed the country. So today, we are going to travel through thousands of years of British history. We will begin with ancient Britain, then we will meet the Romans, the Anglo-Saxons, the Vikings, and the Normans. We will discover Magna Carta, the Tudors, Parliament, the British Empire, and the Industrial Revolution. And finally, we will see how Britain became the modern country we know today. And remember, this is not only a history lesson, it is also an English lesson. So listen carefully, pay attention to useful words and expressions, and if you hear a sentence that you like, pause the video and repeat it aloud. Let's begin. Chapter 1. Ancient Britain. The story of Britain began thousands of years before modern cities existed. There were no skyscrapers, no highways, no trains, no smartphones, and there was no English language. Britain was a very different place. It was covered by forests, rivers, hills, and open land. Small groups of people lived close to nature. They hunted animals. They collected plants and food. They fished in rivers and lakes. And they made simple tools from stone, wood, and bone. Life was difficult. There were no hospitals. There was no modern medicine. There were no supermarkets. If people could not find enough food, they could not simply go to a shop. They had to survive with what nature gave them. But slowly, human life began to change. One of the biggest changes came when people discovered farming. Instead of moving constantly in search of food, people could grow crops and keep animals. They could stay in one place. Villages began to appear. People built homes. They developed communities, and human society became more organized. One of the most famous reminders of ancient Britain is Stonehenge. Imagine standing in front of those enormous stones thousands of years ago. How did ancient people move them? Why did they build them? What were they thinking? We do not have all the answers. But Stonehenge tells us something important. Ancient people were capable of planning, organization, construction, and cooperation. They watched the sky. They observed the seasons. They thought about nature, life, death, and the world around them. Later, Britain entered the Bronze Age and then the Iron Age. People learned how to work with metals. Tools became stronger. Weapons became more effective. Farming improved, and different communities became more powerful. During the Iron Age, many Celtic-speaking tribes lived in Britain. They were not one united nation. There were different tribes, different leaders, and different territories. They had warriors, farmers, craftsmen, and religious leaders known as Druids. Their societies were diverse and often independent. But there was a powerful empire growing across Europe, an empire that would soon arrive in Britain. That empire was Rome. Chapter 2. The Romans arrive. The Roman Empire was one of the most powerful civilizations of the ancient world. Roman armies were highly organized. Roman engineers built roads and bridges. Roman governments collected taxes. Roman cities became centers of trade and administration, and in AD 43, Roman forces invaded Britain. The invasion was not easy. Some British tribes resisted. One of the most famous leaders of this resistance was Boudicca. Boudicca was a queen who led a major rebellion against Roman rule. Her forces attacked Roman settlements and challenged the empire's authority. For a time, the rebellion was extremely powerful, but Rome eventually defeated Boudicca's forces. Roman control expanded. Britain became part of the Roman Empire, and Roman rule changed the country. The Romans built roads. They built forts. They built towns. They built temples, markets, baths, and government buildings. One of their most famous achievements was Hadrian's Wall in northern Britain. The wall helped defend the Roman frontier and control movement. Roman Britain also became more connected. One important settlement was Londinium. Over time, Londinium developed into the city we know today as London. The Romans brought new systems of law, money, writing, architecture, and government. But Roman Britain was not the same everywhere. Some people lived in Roman-style towns. Others lived in villas. Many ordinary people continued to live in villages and work on farms. So Britain became a mixture of Roman and local traditions. For almost 4 centuries, Rome ruled much of Britain. But eventually, the Roman Empire became weaker. It faced political problems, economic difficulties, and attacks in other parts of the empire. Rome could no longer protect all of its distant territories. Roman soldiers gradually left Britain, and when Roman rule ended in the early 5th century, Britain entered a new and uncertain period. The Romans were gone, but the story of Britain was only beginning. Chapter 3: Anglo-Saxons and Vikings. After the Romans left, there was no single powerful government controlling all of Britain. Local rulers competed for power, different groups fought for territory, and new people began arriving from northern Europe. Among them were the Anglo-Saxons and Jutes. Together, they are commonly known as the Anglo-Saxons. They came from areas that are now parts of Germany, Denmark, and the Netherlands. Some arrived as warriors, others arrived as settlers with families. They established communities and gradually created several kingdoms. This period was extremely important for the development of England. In fact, the name England comes from the Angles, and the language spoken by these Germanic communities became what we call Old English. Old English was very different from the English we speak today, but it was one of the foundations of the modern language. Several Anglo-Saxon kingdoms became powerful. Among them were Wessex, Mercia, Northumbria, and East Anglia. These kingdoms often competed with each other, but another major force was about to arrive: the Vikings. The Vikings came from Scandinavia. They were sailors, traders, explorers, settlers, and warriors. Their ships were fast and flexible. They could travel across the sea and move along rivers. At first, Viking attacks were sudden and frightening. They attacked monasteries, villages, and towns. One famous attack took place in AD 793 at Lindisfarne, but the Vikings did more than raid. Many eventually settled in Britain. They established communities. They controlled land. They traded, and they influenced the English language, culture, and law. A large part of England came under Viking control. This area became known as the Danelaw. One Anglo-Saxon king who became famous for fighting the Vikings was Alfred the Great. Alfred understood that defending a kingdom required more than an army. A strong country also needed education, organization, law, and leadership. Over time, Anglo-Saxons and Vikings began to influence each other. Their cultures mixed, their languages influenced each other, and England slowly moved toward greater political unity. But then came the year that changed everything. Chapter 4: The Norman Conquest. In 1066, King Edward the Confessor died without a clear heir. This created a struggle for the English throne. Harold Godwinson became king, but William, Duke of Normandy, also believed that he had a right to the throne. William prepared an army. He crossed the English Channel, and the two sides met at the Battle of Hastings. Harold was defeated. William won, and he became known as William the Conqueror. The Norman Conquest transformed England. The new rulers spoke Norman French. They built castles across the country. They gave land to Norman nobles. They changed government and administration. They strengthened royal authority, and they introduced new architectural styles and systems of power. The conquest also changed the English language. Old English came into contact with Norman French. Over time, the two languages influenced each other. This is one reason modern English contains so many words connected to French. Words related to government, law, food, culture, and administration often have French origins. William also ordered the creation of the Domesday Book. It recorded land, property, and resources across much of England. The purpose was practical. William wanted to know what people owned and how much tax could be collected. The Norman Conquest was therefore much more than a change of king. It changed England's politics, its culture, its language, its society, and its relationship with Europe. Chapter 5: Magna Carta and the Rise of Parliament. Medieval England was a world of castles, knights, kings, nobles, churches, villages, and farms. Most ordinary people worked on the land. Life was difficult. Disease was dangerous. Medical knowledge was limited. And political power was concentrated in the hands of kings, nobles, and the church. But an important political idea was slowly developing: the idea that even a king should have limits. In 1215, King John was forced to agree to Magna Carta. The document was created during a conflict between the king and powerful nobles. The nobles were unhappy with John's taxes, military failures, and style of rule. Magna Carta did not create modern democracy. It did not give equal rights to everyone. But it introduced an idea that would become extremely important: the ruler is not above the law. That idea became part of a much larger political tradition. Over the centuries, Parliament became more important. Kings still had enormous power, but they increasingly had to work with political institutions. England also experienced major wars. The 100 Years' War created long conflict between England and France. Then came the Black Death. In the 14th century, a deadly disease spread across Europe. Millions of people died. Britain suffered terribly. Villages lost large numbers of people. Farms were abandoned, and the shortage of workers changed the economy. Surviving workers became more valuable. Some demanded better wages and better conditions. Society began to change. Later came the Wars of the Roses. Two powerful noble houses, Lancaster and York, fought for control of the English throne. Their symbols became the red rose and the white rose. Years of conflict eventually ended when Henry Tudor defeated Richard III at Bosworth in 1485. The Tudor dynasty had begun. Chapter 6. The Tudors and the Changing Nation. The Tudor period is one of the most famous periods in English history, and one Tudor king is especially famous, Henry VIII. Henry VIII ruled during a period of major religious and political change. He had 6 wives. He wanted a male heir, and he eventually broke with the authority of the Pope in Rome. This led to the English Reformation. The Church of England became separate from the authority of the Pope. But this was not simply a religious change. Religion was closely connected to politics, land, money, education, and royal power. So the Reformation transformed many parts of English society. After Henry VIII came Elizabeth I. Elizabeth ruled during a period that became known as the Elizabethan Age. England became increasingly confident. Literature flourished. The theatre became popular, and one of the greatest writers in the English language, William Shakespeare, created his famous works during this period. England was also becoming a stronger naval power. In 1588, Spain sent the Spanish Armada to invade England. The English fleet resisted. Weather also played an important role. The Armada was defeated. The victory became a symbol of English confidence and naval strength. But political conflict was not over. The relationship between the monarchy and Parliament became increasingly difficult. Eventually, this conflict contributed to the English Civil War. King Charles fought against Parliament. The country became divided. The king's supporters were known as royalists. Parliament's supporters fought against them. Eventually, Parliament's forces won. Charles I was executed in 1649. For a short period, England became a republic under Oliver Cromwell, but the monarchy returned in 1660. Then in 1688, another major political change took place. The Glorious Revolution. William and Mary became monarchs, but royal power was increasingly limited. The Bill of Rights of 1689 strengthened Parliament. This helped develop Britain's constitutional monarchy. In other words, Britain could have a king or queen, but political power was increasingly controlled by law and Parliament. Chapter 7. Empire and the Industrial Revolution. By the 18th century, Britain was becoming a major global power. Its navy grew stronger. Its ships traveled across oceans. British traders, settlers, soldiers, and administrators reached many parts of the world. The British Empire eventually became one of the largest empires in history. People once said, "The sun never sets on the British Empire." But the history of empire is complicated. Britain spread its language, legal systems, institutions, technologies, and trade networks. At the same time, imperial rule also involved exploitation, violence, political control, and the loss of freedom for many people. India became one of the most important parts of the British Empire. The East India Company began as a trading organization, but gradually gained political power. After the uprising of 1857, the British Crown took direct control of India. British rule brought major economic and political changes, but it also brought exploitation, inequality, political restrictions, and suffering. The history of empire, therefore, cannot be understood as only a story of achievement. It must also include the experiences of the people who lived under imperial rule. While Britain was expanding overseas, another revolution was transforming life at home, the Industrial Revolution. Britain became the world's first industrial nation. Machines changed production. Factories grew. Steam engines powered industry. Coal and iron became extremely important. Railways connected cities, and towns grew rapidly. Manchester, Birmingham, Liverpool, Glasgow, and London became major industrial centres. Industrialisation created enormous wealth, but it also created serious problems. Workers often worked long hours. Children worked in dangerous conditions. Cities became crowded. Pollution increased. Poor families often lived in unhealthy housing. So industrial progress had two sides. It created opportunity and wealth, but it also created inequality and suffering. Over time, people demanded reform. Workers wanted better conditions. Children needed protection. People demanded political representation. Public health improved, education expanded, and Britain slowly moved toward a more modern society. Chapter 8. World Wars and Modern Britain. The 20th century brought some of the most difficult moments in Britain's history. World War I began in 1914. Britain entered the war against Germany and its allies. Millions of soldiers fought. The war brought trenches, machine guns, disease, fear, and enormous loss of life. The war ended in 1918. Britain was on the winning side. But victory came at a huge cost. The country had lost millions of lives and enormous amounts of money. Then, only a few decades later, another world war began. World War II. In 1940, Britain faced one of its most dangerous moments. Nazi Germany had conquered large parts of Europe. Britain stood against Hitler. The Battle of Britain became a crucial moment. German aircraft attacked British cities and airfields. The Royal Air Force fought back. London and other cities suffered heavy bombing during the Blitz. Ordinary families spent nights in shelters. Buildings were destroyed. Lives were lost. But Britain continued the fight. The speeches and leadership of Winston Churchill became symbols of national resistance. World War II ended in 1945. Britain had again been on the winning side, but the country was exhausted and economically weakened. And another enormous change was coming. The British Empire began to disappear. Countries across Asia, Africa, and the Caribbean demanded independence. India became independent in 1947. Many other countries followed. This process became known as decolonization. Britain was no longer the empire it had once been. It needed a new identity. At the same time, Britain was changing inside its own borders. The welfare state expanded. The National Health Service, or NHS, was created in 1948. The idea was simple and powerful. Healthcare should be available to ordinary people, not only to those who could afford it. Education and social support also expanded. Women gained more rights, workers gained more rights, and immigration changed British society. People arrived from former colonies and from many other parts of the world. Britain became increasingly multicultural. Different languages, religions, foods, traditions, and communities became part of modern British life. Chapter 9. Britain Today. Britain is very different from the country that existed hundreds of years ago. It is a modern democracy. It has a monarchy. But political power belongs primarily to Parliament and the elected government. Britain has ancient castles and modern cities. It has old traditions and new cultures. It has famous literature, music, science, education, sport, film, and media. Its language has become a global language, but Britain also continues to face difficult questions. Questions about national identity, immigration, the future of Scotland, the relationship between Britain and Europe, the legacy of empire, and the meaning of Britain's place in the modern world. Britain's decision to leave the European Union, known as Brexit, showed that its relationship with Europe remains an important political issue, but perhaps the most important lesson from Britain's history is not about power. It is about change. Britain changed because people changed it. Farmers changed it, soldiers changed it, kings and queens changed, workers changed it, writers changed it, inventors changed it, immigrants changed it, and ordinary people changed it. Final chapter. What can we learn from British history? So what can we learn from this long journey? Britain began with small human communities living close to nature. Then came farming, then Celtic societies, then the Romans, then the Anglo-Saxons, then the Vikings, then the Normans, then medieval kings and parliament, then the Tudors, then empire, then industrialization, then 2 world wars, then decolonization, and finally modern Britain. Every generation changed the country. Every period left something behind. The Romans left roads, cities, and infrastructure. The Anglo-Saxons helped shape the English language. The Vikings influenced culture, law, and vocabulary. The Normans transformed government and society. Magna Carta helped develop the idea that rulers should be subject to law. Parliament became an important part of British political life. The Industrial Revolution transformed work and technology. The British Empire spread English around the world, while also leaving a complicated legacy of power and suffering. The World Wars changed Britain's position in the world, and modern Britain continues to evolve. This is why history is so important. History is not only about remembering dates. It is not only about memorizing kings And it is not only about famous battles. History helps us understand why the world looks the way it does. Today, it teaches us that power can build, but power can also destroy. Progress can create wealth, but it can also create inequality. Empire can spread influence, but it can also create suffering. War can demonstrate courage, but it can also show the terrible cost of conflict. And change is something that no country can avoid. So, if you have watched this video until the end, congratulations. You have not only learned about British history, you have also practiced English through a long and meaningful story. Listen again, repeat the sentences, learn the vocabulary, and most importantly, do not be afraid of making mistakes, because learning a language is also a journey. Just like history, it happens one step at a time. If you enjoyed this lesson, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to English Gateway. For more simple English lessons through interesting stories, keep listening, keep learning, keep improving, and remember, every story you understand makes your English stronger. See you in the next lesson.